Latin America is changing fast, and what was once seen as the United States' backyard is beginning to switch sides. In 2000, China barely had a footprint in the region. Today, it's South America's largest trading partner. In Brazil, trade has already ballooned to over $180 billion, more than twice what it does with the US, and the effects are already showing. Not long ago, China bought most of its soybeans from American farmers. Now, its main supplier is Brazil, a shift that was never accidental, but part of a much bigger plan. However, trade is just the beginning of China's strategy. Since 2005, they've pumped more than $300 billion into Latin America in the form of investment and loans. Beijing is financing a new superport in Peru, lithium mines in Chile, and even a massive space tracking center in remote Patagonia. As this money floods into the continent, American control is quickly being eroded. In both Mexico and Brazil, people now view American involvement as a more serious political problem than the Chinese. America had always garnished a reputation for throwing its weight around in the continent, but Beijing's approach is different. Instead of soldiers and coups, it's loans, construction crews, and long infrastructure deals. We've already seen this playbook in Africa, where billions of Chinese investment have transformed infrastructure and won public approval. And now that same strategy is unfolding right on America's doorstep. Given how much is at stake, Washington's response has been shockingly small. While Democrats and Republicans bicker over partisan politics, China is moving in. They're not just trading with America's neighbours, but quietly rewriting the balance of power on their doorstep. This may all seem like fear-mongering, but the scale of China's influence is hard to miss. This map shows every port in Latin America with Chinese ownership or operational control, and this chart ranks them by their strategic risk to the United States. Once you see it laid out, a web of red and orange hotspots spread across the continent, and it doesn't stop at ports. The same pattern shows up across railways, highways, and even power grids. To grasp how quickly things are changing in Latin America, we need to understand what the norm was before Beijing arrived. Because for decades after the collapse of the Soviet Union, American influence went largely unchallenged. Time and time again, governments across Latin America were pressured into adopting Washington's agenda, whether it made sense locally or not. From coca eradication to extradition treaties, the story was usually the same. When Washington wanted something done, it got its way. If you played ball with Washington, they would use their position at the IMF and World Bank to secure you loans. For a struggling economy, this could be a lifeline in times of crisis, or the push they needed to reach the next rung on the development ladder. But every dollar would come with strings attached. The so-called Washington Consensus promised stability, but for many in the global south, it looked less like reform and more like Washington rewriting the rules in its own favour. And if Latin America refused the carrot, they would get the stick. America made sure that defiance came with a cost, withholding aid, imposing sanctions, or in the worst case, backing regime change. And for decades, this strategy worked, but little by little it began to come undone. In 2017, President Maduro of Venezuela defied Washington's demands for free and fair elections, and in response, the Trump administration unleashed some of the harshest sanctions in US history. The expectation was clear. These would lead to economic collapse, followed by regime change, as they had done so many times before. But this time was different. Instead, China stepped in, extending credit, buying oil, and keeping Maduro's government afloat. For the first time in decades, a foreign power had challenged Washington's will in the Western Hemisphere, and they'd won. Just a couple of decades ago, this kind of thing would have been unimaginable. Back then, China was barely anywhere to be seen in the Western Hemisphere, let alone powerful enough to challenge American dominance. But things began to change in 2001. Their ascension to the World Trade Organization threw open the doors to international trade and changed the shape of the global economy forever. Throughout the 2000s and early 2010s, China's economy grew at an average of 10% a year, doubling its size every 7 years. Factories in Shenzhen roared to life, cranking out televisions, clothes, and electronics, bound for every corner of the world. But that kind of growth came with an appetite. Iron, oil, soybeans, copper. Latin America's resources became indispensable for China's rise. In return, consumers from across the region benefited from being able to purchase mass-produced Chinese goods that may have previously been out of reach. It was a natural partnership built on comparative advantage. China had the labour force and the factories, and Latin America had the materials. From 2000 to 2024, trade between China and Latin America exploded, from barely $12 billion to over $500 billion today. On the surface, it might seem like Washington simply wasn't paying attention, but that wasn't the case. You see, the US didn't just allow China's rise, it helped design it. Policymakers in Washington believed that opening China's economy would, in time, open its politics too. But the plan backfired. When the dust settled in the early 2010s, Xi Jinping was consolidating his power, both at home and in Latin America, and it slowly dawned on Washington that they had made a historic miscalculation. The US hadn't just helped China's economy grow into a peer competitor, it had opened the door to its own backyard and invited them in. Today, China has replaced the US as the most important trading partner for many countries in Latin America, especially the resource-rich nations of South America. Excluding Mexico, China is already Latin America's largest trading partner and shows no signs of slowing down. The explosion in Chinese demand has created a commodities boom, with the ripple effects felt across the region. Millions of jobs have been created, exporters have grown rich, and governments have seen their tax revenues swell. But while it's undeniable that Latin America has gained from trade with China, those gains have also come at a cost. In Chile, nearly 40% of its exports now go straight to China, mostly copper. That copper isn't just another product, it's the backbone of the Chilean economy. And if Beijing ever decided to stop buying, the entire industry would take a nosedive. That would mean mass layoffs in the mines, collapsing wages, and a government suddenly unable to fund schools or hospitals. And therein lies the problem. This isn't just trade anymore, it's dependence. When one country has the power to push you into recession overnight, you simply can't risk getting on their bad side. But here's the thing, trade was only step one. Because in recent years, China has rolled out something far more powerful than exports: investment. Since 2000, more than $200 billion has been poured into Latin America, mostly through state-owned giants investing in strategic sectors such as transportation, energy, and extractive industries. Unlike American investment, which has been driven by the private sector, this is all part of a wider strategy. In 2018, Beijing formally invited the region into the Belt and Road Initiative, which aims to reroute the global economy of the 21st century into China's favour. Today, 2/3 of Latin American countries have signed on, and the results are hard to miss. Solar farms rising out of the desert, new ports carved into the coast, rail lines cutting across the continent. And when Latin American countries ran short on cash, China opened the vaults, lending another $141 billion, which is more than the World Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, and the Latin American Development Bank combined. Gone were the days when Washington held the only purse strings, because Beijing wasn't just offering money, it was offering an escape from the Western financial system and escape from the dollar itself. Some loans weren't repaid in dollars at all, but in yuan, or even barrels of oil. This wasn't just trade anymore, it was the foundation of a whole new economic system. And once China was bankrolling the region's future, the doors swung open for Xi Jinping himself. Since 2013, he's visited Latin America 6 times. That's more than Obama, Trump, and Biden managed combined, in what was supposed to be their backyard. And he doesn't just show up, he tends to leave with trophies. In Peru, he upgraded a free trade agreement and cut the ribbon on a Chinese-built megaport. In Brazil, he elevated their strategic partnership to the level of a China-Brazil community, the highest symbol of Chinese diplomatic relations. But these weren't just one-off wins. Beijing was now building something bigger, shifting from country-to-country deals to multilateral platforms where Washington wasn't invited. At the China CELAC Forum in 2025, Xi cast China and Latin America as brothers in the global south, standing shoulder to shoulder against Trump's tariffs, which he portrayed as Western bullying and tyranny. And then he put his money where his mouth is, pledging another $9 billion in funding for CELAC. Step by step, he's turned American mistakes into opportunities, and the region is responding. In 2017, more than half of CELAC's members still recognise Taiwan. Today, only 7 do. That's not just a statistic, it's the clearest sign yet that Latin America's loyalties are shifting, away from Washington and toward Beijing. So this raises the real question, why Latin America? Why is Beijing pouring so much time, money and attention into a region thousands of miles from home? The answer lies in what China needs most: resources. Back in the mid-2010s, Beijing's big play in Latin America was oil. Over $60 billion was lent to Venezuela, far more than could ever realistically be repaid. But that didn't matter. Repayment was denominated in barrels of crude oil, and if Venezuela failed to repay, that loan could always be extended and restructured to Beijing's benefit. While the West whined about debt-trap diplomacy from the sidelines, the world's largest oil importer secured access to the world's largest proven oil reserves. Today, however, Beijing has its eyes set on a different prize. Since 2018, Chinese state-owned firms have invested more than $11 billion in Latin American lithium projects alone, buying up mines in Argentina, Bolivia and Chile. In Peru, Chinalco had poured billions into expanding its Toromocho copper mine. Down the road, another state-owned firm took control of a site so large it produces 2% of the world's copper supply, by itself. These metals may seem ordinary, but they're the building blocks of the future. Electric vehicles, renewable grids, semiconductors, artificial intelligence all depend on lithium and copper, and Latin America has more of them than anywhere else. The so-called lithium triangle contains half the world's reserves, and in copper, Chile and Peru together account for a third of global output. Whoever controls Latin America controls these resources. That's why Beijing simply isn't investing, it's securing its future. For them, competition over Latin America isn't just about challenging the American global order, it's about survival. China's old growth model is running out of road. For 4 decades, cheap exports and low-cost labour powered its rise, but wages have climbed, and its comparative advantage has melted away, and the dreaded middle-income trap is closing in. The only way out? Move up the value ladder and compete with developed economies in complex, high-tech industries. But here's the problem: time is short. The green energy transition and the rise of artificial intelligence are ripping up the rulebook of the global economy. Old giants like oil and gas are fading, while new industries, EVs, renewables, and data centers are exploding. For Beijing, this disruption is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. If it locks down the raw materials, it doesn't just join these industries, it dominates them. But miss the window and the opportunity vanishes. The industries will mature, the leaders will be set, and breaking in later will be nearly impossible. Germany needed a century to build its car industry, and the US spent decades perfecting aerospace. Once the doors close, they rarely open again. That's why Beijing is moving so aggressively now. If China succeeds, it will finally catch up in development to the West. And for Beijing, that has been the dream since the guns of the Second World War fell silent. To erase the century of humiliation that still looms large in the psyche and reclaim its place as a true global superpower. But Beijing's gamble on Latin America doesn't just promise to change China's future. For Latin America, it's also a game changer. Chinese trade and investment have the potential to supercharge growth, create jobs, and raise living standards across the region. Just as important, Beijing's presence gives Latin America something it hasn't had since the fall of the USSR: leverage. When China is a viable alternative source of funding, Washington can't afford to overload the IMF loans with political strings, not without risking pushing them into the arms of Beijing. For the first time in decades, governments can play both sides, extracting better deals by forcing superpowers to compete. This isn't without consequences though. During the Cold War, the struggle for influence brought disappearances, death squads, and dictatorships. Operation Condor saw the CIA orchestrate repression in US-backed military dictatorships in South America, resulting in over 50,000 left-wing activists being killed. If the world really is sliding into another Cold War, Latin America doesn't just risk becoming a metaphorical battlefield, but a literal one. For the US, the stakes are just as high. If Beijing controls the flow of critical resources, it holds a knife to the throat of America's future industries, from green energy to defense tech. This isn't just about trade deals or mining stakes, it's about strategic vulnerability. As Chinese money chips away at US influence, Washington's grip on its own neighbourhood is slipping. That means less cooperation on issues of grave importance, from the war on drugs to mass migration, but the consequences run even deeper, because China's strategy in Latin America is part of a bigger picture, the challenge to America's role as a global leader. If Beijing can undermine the US-led order and offer a world alternative, America may soon lose its position as the world's preeminent power. To remain the global hegemon, the US must act fast to confront China's advance, especially in Latin America. History shows that this rarely ends peacefully. And with war on the verge of breaking out between Trump's America and Venezuela, China's closest ally in the region, we may soon see military force put back onto the table as the US seeks to re-establish lost influence. Latin America may seem peripheral to some, but it could soon become the front line of a new era of a superpower competition. And if Washington really has been sleeping, then the question is simple. When it finally wakes up, will it already be too late? But while Washington and Beijing battle for control of the world's resources, one thing is clear. Commodities are power, and few assets have proven more timeless or more strategic than gold. What's happening in the world of gold right now can be summed up in one word: unprecedented. It's just surged past $4,000 an ounce, and billionaire investors like Ray Dalio are comparing today's environment to the 1970s, a time when owning gold was essential. The Trump administration is now reshaping the Federal Reserve and taking equity positions in mining companies, a major shift for the sector. Gold, silver and copper are all near record highs, and the tailwinds from Washington are stronger than they've been in decades. The sponsor of today's video, US Gold Mining Inc., is trading on the NASDAQ under the symbol USGO. The company's Whistler project in Alaska is one of the largest undeveloped gold-copper projects on US soil, and notably the closest of its scale to Anchorage. Alaska is becoming central to the US resource strategy. President Trump issued 2 executive orders, unleashing Alaska's extraordinary resource potential and another titled Immediate Measures to Increase American Mineral Production, both directing federal agencies to accelerate domestic mining, especially for gold and copper. At the state level, Governor Mike Dunleavy is a strong advocate for mining and has personally visited the Whistler site, along with Senator Lisa Murkowski and Congressman Nick Begich. The administration also recently approved the Ambler Road project, a 211-mile road unlocking access to northern Alaska's mineral districts, a clear sign of growing support for the industry. The Whistler project mineral resource estimate comprises of 294 million tons at 0.68 grams per ton of gold equivalent, for 6.48 million ounces gold equivalent in the indicated category, plus 198 million tons at 0.65 grams per ton gold equivalent, for 4.16 million ounces of gold equivalent inferred. The company's technical reports and filings, including its 10K and its updated mineral resource estimate, are available at sec.gov and cerdaplus.ca for full details. What makes this setup compelling is how tightly held the stock is. 78% of outstanding shares are controlled by the parent company, and another 4.5% by management and insiders, meaning over 80% of shares are locked up. Now, a major catalyst is in motion. US Gold Mining has begun its preliminary economic assessment, an early-stage study of the project's economic potential. With gold above $4,000 an ounce and copper near $5 a pound, the timing couldn't be stronger. Between record prices, supportive federal policy, and advancing development in Alaska, US Gold Mining is positioning itself in what could be a defining moment for the next American mining boom. As always, do your own extensive research and look up US Gold Mining, USGO, on the NASDAQ and review the company's filings on sec.gov and cerdaplus.ca for detailed information on the project, financials, and resource estimates.